Ladies and gentlemen, I launched the book yesterday, and some of it was written listening to certain soundtracks by our next guest. So if you want inspiration, look no further than, ladies and gentlemen, Dominic, Glynn.
So many of you probably already know that Dominic did one of the versions of the Doctor Who theme, so we'll just refresh your memory by playing which one it was. Thank you, that's how that work.
They get the gist, don't you?
Yeah. So, I mean, my first question really is, how do you get a gig like that?
Well, I don't know how generally you get a gig. I can tell you how I got the gig. I literally just wrote a letter to John Nathan-Turner, who was the producer of Doctor Who, and paraphrasing slightly, I sort of said, I could do that. Please give me a job. And quite bizarrely, he did. It wasn't quite as simple as that, but that's kind of like compressing it down. I wrote a letter, I sent him a cassette tape, with some synth noodling that I'd done and thought would be suitable for Doctor Who, and he liked it. And he asked me to send in another tape, which I did. And then I think this was around about the time that it got put on hiatus, as they say. Doctor Who was taken off the air for 18 months. And I thought, there goes my chance of getting a job. I thought, that was when I was working. I was only 23 at the time. But I thought, this is my career, I was doing music for Doctor Who, and then they announced it was going off the air. So that's sod's law. But then, when it was then announced it was coming back, I heard from John Nathan-Turner again. He said, I'm still interested in getting you involved in doing the music. Can I send you a script on the first story and ask you to write something to that script? Not the whole lot, but just that opening sequence, which was the space station, famously the most expensive model shot in Doctor Who history. So I wrote a piece just based on the first couple of pages of the script, and sent that to John, and he liked it, so he gave me the job. But it was very much a case of just randomly sending a letter off, him responding.
Wonderful. I mean, I know the man had his faults, but he was very good at finding new people and giving new people a chance.
Yeah, he was. He made a thing of it. You know, people like Andrew Cartmel, who was the script editor after the Armadacon season. He'd never worked before in TV. Lots of the writers had interviews for nurturing new talent, which was fantastic. Yeah, he did have his faults, but he had many, many positive points as well.
So I believe as well as the themes, so you did quite a bit of the incidentals.
Yeah.
Any particular highlights from those?
Well, as I say, so that what we just saw there before the internet failed us miserably was that was the first piece of music I wrote for Doctor Who, and that sort of holds a special place in my memory because it was the first thing I did. But I was also very lucky to get a sequence with no dialogue because one of the things you're writing music for TV is obviously you're not putting on a concert, you are making music to boost or enhance something else. And you don't want to crash dialogue, you don't want to sort of fight the plot and you want to help it and enhance it. That normally means restraint and holding back. But for that very opening sequence, it was just music, which was, from my point of view, a dream to get that. And also to get a beautiful sequence of this. And also, it looked great on paper. When I got that script before it was even made, I thought, oh, this is fantastic writing. So yes, so there was that. I mean, I also did music for, well, I did 6 episodes in that season. And I killed off Colin Baker, which is all very sad. I killed off Mel, Bobby Langford's character. I seem to have got all these episodes where people left the show, or the show ended. I did the very last episode of Doctor Who in the early days. There were things like the Happiness Patrol, which I was quite proud of. Which,
that was a nice one I remember for music, because you had the haunting harmonica.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know if any of you have seen the Happiness Patrol, but it was about, it's a sort of...
it's very satirical.
Very satirical, and it's about people being forced to be happy, and the juxtaposition of music on screen between the bland, awful lift music that pervades this planet everywhere you go. It's horrible, bland stuff, which I had to create.
How painful was that to do?
Well, it was counterbalanced by the fact that I also had to create music with real blues and soul, which was what the harmonica player did. And so we were able to counterbalance this, like the hearts with the, the slush. So I really enjoyed that challenge. Actually, it was quite a good fun thing to do. And also, I had the chance to work with a friend of mine who's a brilliant harmonica player, and he just made the harmonica cry. There's a sequence where the lead villain in the story is Helen A, played by Sheila Hancock. She's got this pet monster. It's like a sort of dog-sized thing, probably big teeth, and it's a horrible creature. But she's the one thing that she loves. Everything else in her life is awful. She's a dictator and a tyrant, but she melts over this creature. And spoiler, in the last episode, the creature dies, and that's what breaks her. And she bursts into tears. And we have this piece of music which was played by Adam on the harmonica. And like I say, he made the harmonica, cry. So many people have said to me the one time they've ever cried for Doctor Who was in the sequence where the puppy dies. Well, never mind, I hope I contributed to your tears.
I don't remember crying, but I do remember I can hear the harmonica thinking about it. It's definitely And similarly with that opening, I was fortunate enough to be at a Doctor Who convention, Armadacon, where they previewed just that sequence on the most enormous screen, and it gave me vertigo, but in a very good way.
But it was
the most amazing opening of a season.
Well, it wasn't CGI as well. It was a model. That has a sort of weight to it, because it's not CGI. I mean, of course, in those days, CGI was almost non-existent, and they certainly couldn't afford to do it at the BBC. So yeah, it was impressive.
So how much background information do you get given up front for something like that?
Well, when I was working on the show, what the process used to be, initially you'd have a conversation with the producer. That would be the first thing, and he would say, I would like you to do this story, and he would give you an outline of what the story was about. Send you the script, so you'd get the 3 or 4 episodes on paper, and you'd read through it, and get a feel for it. Then you would have a meeting with the director. In those days, the director was very much in charge of that story. So each story would have a written director, and they would be allocated to make all the creative decisions on that story. So I would then have a meeting with the director, and we would go through the sort of basics of what you might like for the story. Just trying to get the order of things right. Then they'd shoot it, and I would normally go along to probably 1 of the days of filming it, just so again I got to know what it was going to look like. Then another pause while they edited it, all the stuff together, and I would then go to the radiophonic workshop at this one. I wasn't working from the radiophonic workshop, I was a freelancer, but we used to go to the BBC radiophonic workshop to view finished episodes. And the sound effects and special sound, as he was known in person, Dick Mills, worked out of the radiophonic workshop. So we would go there, view finished episode, and take notes as to where we wanted music to come in and where we wanted to go out, sort of the in and out points of music, what they were trying to convey at that point in the music. Was there any particular mood that they wanted to get across? And we would sort of negotiate, so there would be 3 of us, me and the director and Dick Mills, and we would sort of negotiate between the 3 of us who's going to do what, and whether or not the sound effects were going to be more important there than the music, or whether we actually needed music in that sequence. And some directors knew exactly what they wanted, and some didn't have a clue what they wanted. And I'm not saying either was good or bad, but it's just, you know, if they didn't know what they wanted, it meant I had more freedom to do what I wanted. But sometimes they had a much clearer idea of what they wanted. And then at the end of that session of the radiophonic workshop, I would take home a VHS cassette tape, stick it in my VHS machine at home. It was very primitive. Bearing in mind I was working from home, I put it in my VHS tape machine, and I pressed play on my reel-to-reel tape machine, and I just get playing and sort of see what comes up. And then about 10 days later, hopefully I'd have finished an episode. Then the director would come to my house, we'd go through what I'd done, I'd press play and play on that, the 2 things would sync up, hopefully. And he'd say whether or not he thought it was a pile of crap or whether it was just going to be effective. And generally speaking, he liked what I did. So, yeah, that was the process. And then the final stage of the process is, assuming he'd given me thumbs up and everything, the sound mix would be done about a week later, which was at the BBC Television Centre. We'd go in and add in all the sound elements to the show, all the sound effects, all the music, get the balance of dialogue right, and we get to where actors had to come in because the dialogue wasn't quite right, they had to redo it with the dialogue, whatever that would happen at that stage. And then right at the end, the producer would come in and he would have the producer's viewing of it, and then that was it, signed, sealed, and ready to broadcast. And that was done in quite a short space of time. It wasn't a long, drawn out process. And in fact, as I often say, if the producer didn't like it, much he could do about it. That stage was probably going to be on the air in about 2 weeks' time. So certainly on the episodes I worked on, we never had any issues with things having to go back and done again. There were occasions where that did happen. There was one, in fact it was in this Trial of a Time Loop season, there was a second story. Some of you may know the story of the soundtrack to that. The music score to the second story got completely scrapped because the guy that did it did something very off the wall and experimental, and I think it wasn't, they decided it wasn't my story completely, so they completely gutted the soundtrack and got Kevin McCulloch to come in because he had a reputation working very quickly, and he basically did it over a weekend, rescored the entire 4 episodes, I think. It was called. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. Trial of Time. That's right. It was a guy called David Snell who did the score originally. Yeah, so that it's a rarity, but occasionally that happens.
It's interesting that you've got so many creative inputs from other people, so many restrictions on timing and on the vibe and so forth, compared to what you normally think of composing, which is, I'm going to do my thing and spend how long I want on this. How does it compare?
You very much have to realise that you are part of a group when you're doing incidental music. So it isn't about really music, as you say, you are enhancing an overall thing. And that's what I like that about it, actually. I like to think that I've contributed in some way to hopefully making the end result more impressive. You know, if I sort of went to town with music and went over the top, it would do the opposite. It wouldn't actually enhance it, it would detract. So yeah, you have to have some constraints, like I say, when you're doing it. There are odd occasions, like I say, when you've got a sequence where you haven't got any dialogue and the music's important to that point, you can show off a bit, you know. But generally speaking, don't show off.
I often think it's a bit like stage crew who have to make sure an item is exactly where an actor needs to pick it up and mustn't let the audience know they did it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's often an argument that good incidental music you don't notice. And I'm sort of in that camp, but I also think there's a part of me that thinks good incidental music you don't really notice what it's doing, but when the episode's finished, you can still hear that thing in your head. You think, oh, yeah, and then you hear that music again separately, and it takes you back to the scene that you can remember it from. So that's where I'm at. You know, I don't like to make it so bland that it has no life on its own.
You want it noticed subconsciously,
yes,
rather than consciously.
Exactly that,
Yeah, I did see a thing that showed. It was actually some footage from one of the Peter Davison episodes, and it was just a little clip where you know there are Cybermen around, but at this point they're being very careful, and there's a jump scare, and it's a cat.
Right.
And they showed it once without any music, and then they showed it with the background music, and I was amazed at how much difference it made.
Yeah, it can make a massive difference.
This is the anticipation.
I mean, that was always one of the things, watching the episodes with no music and no sound effects, they sort of very often, this isn't going to work, it's sort of so lifeless, and there's no energy, and there's no, and as you say, when you put the sound, you put the music in, and suddenly all the energy goes into the episode. So yeah, it can, I mean, similarly, it can also mess things up. Get it wrong, you can really, I'm always moaning about films and TV shows I watch. I think the music's actually spoiling it, particularly if there's too much music. I'm a big believer in less is more with music. In drama, I think sometimes, particularly nowadays, there's a tendency to swamp everything with music, and it doesn't have the same impact then. I think, you know, like you say, the jump scare thing, for example, you have music going all the way through the scene, and then when you have a jump scare, it kind of doesn't have the same impact as if it's actually silent for a bit. And that's putting it in its most basic form. But yeah, I think it's the contrast. It's just as important, you know, for music.
Now, although we know you best for this, you've done quite a lot of other genre-related stuff. Can you talk us through a few of those that people may suddenly realise they have heard?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's funny, because of Doctor Who, I have sort of got connected with other things that are in the vague, similar. So I ended up, I mean, the thing lots of people know me for as well is I've had some music in Red Dwarf. I didn't actually write the music for Red Dwarf, but I think the reason a lot of it ended up in Red Dwarf is one of the sound supervisors who I worked with on Doctor Who also worked on Red Dwarf, and he knew about my music. And I had several, so I was talking to you earlier on about this. One of the main jobs I've done since I finished working on Doctor Who is library music, production library music, which for the uninitiated is music that is written, pre-written for any use in TV and film, and it's music that is in effect off the shelf. So when you're an editor or a producer or a director and you need a piece of music, you go to a piece that's been pre-written and fitted into the program. So I get employed commissioned by publishers to write this production music, and I've been doing it for 30 years or something, and every conceivable type of music is needed by TV producers, directors, editors. So I happen to, at that point, have written some stuff that was well, actually from several different albums. But Red Dwarf needed extra music above and beyond what their composer had written. So I ended up with, I don't know, 5 or 6 pieces of music in different episodes of Red Dwarf, which was fun. Because again, I was talking about it, so you don't always know where your music's going to be used. So if you've written music as lively music, very often the first you find out about it being used is you're at home watching TV and it comes on. You recognise that? What is that? Oh, it's me.
What's the most unexpected one of those?
The most unexpected, well, I went to the cinema with my girlfriend and it was Harry Enfield's Kevin and Perry Go Large. And I actually had the opening music in the film. So, you know, we sat down, popcorn, whatever, ice cream, lollies, and big loud sequence at the beginning of the film. And it's like, Kevin, have you all seen, anyone seen Kevin?
Yeah.
So he's having a dream about going to the guillotine very beginning of the film. So the music at the, you know, in France, and the music at the beginning is mine. And again, it's very loud. It's one of those sequences of hard in dialogue, and you would never have expected that piece of music to end up in a Kevin and Perry film. But I just punched my goats. So that was the most sort of unexpected. Also, The Simpsons, that's right. So I had music ended up in an episode of The Simpsons. Because, yeah, The Simpsons has got a composer who writes their own music, but in this particular sequence, Homer is very hungry, and there's nothing in the fridge apart from some bicarbonate of soda. It's the completely empty fridge. So it's Homer, so obviously he eats the bicarbonate of soda. He has an antacid trip. And I had written a piece of music that was in the style of the Doors, so it was very psychedelic, and it was a bit like Riders on the Storm or something, and so they used that. And again, I didn't know it until I watched that episode with Simpsons. I wrote that. So yeah, it ends up in all sorts of bizarre places. But then also connected with everything, I then got asked to do things like Blake 7. They did audio dramas of Blake 7. So I've done a few of those as well. And fortunately, my theme ends up in the Big Finish stories as well for Doctor Who with Colin Baker. So that's still going. Even though I wrote the theme, it only used for 1 year, it has lived on for many years since. So yeah, it's. I've been lucky to keep getting associated with this with Doctor Who as well.
Yes, it's the return, courtesy of Big Finish, just when we thought there was nothing, and suddenly they filled in the gap for us.
Absolutely.
I believe you did the In Circles for Jubilee.
Did I?
I think I saw that one.
No, I don't think I've done
it. Or was that another library?
They may well have used some of my stuff. So I haven't written any incidentals for Big Finish. They used my theme, which is, that's across all Colin Baker stories, just about all Colin Baker. But I've actually written all the incidental music for Big Finish. The incidental music I've done is a Blake 7, which wasn't Big Finish actually.
I did my dutiful homework. Apart from the things I already knew, I did a good old Google search, and I found a very unexpected one that I had to go and fact check because I wasn't quite believing it.
Yes.
That you're credited with being the composer of a grade 2 piano exam piece.
It's true. It is true.
Wow.
Which is particularly bizarre because I'm not a trained musician and I can't read music. Yes, I wrote the music for a film about 3 or 4 years ago called Eye of the Storm, which was a documentary film about a brilliant I'll play it to you in a second. I've got video. About a landscape artist who was losing his sight, and a beautiful film actually about fantastic landscapes and his paintings, and the film follows him as he's painting what was in fact his last painting. He was doing it, he had almost no vision. And one of the pieces of music from the film got selected by the Trinity Music College to perform parts of their grade 2 piano exam. So yes, and the weird thing is, so children of 6 or 7 are playing this thing, and I can't play it. I can actually play it, but I'd have to remind myself how to, because I have no memory of things I've written. I can listen to it, oh yeah, I wrote that. I can't remember how to play it.
So are you entirely self-taught?
I'm entirely
And
self-taught.
improvisational?
Yeah. I started as a keyboard player in a band. So when I was at school, me and my mates started a band. And we had a piano at home, and so I used the piano, my vague piano experience where I just used to sit and play chords and fiddle around on my own piano. And I said, I'll be a keyboard player. So that's how I ended up doing that. But, no, I was quite amazed when they said they wanted to use it. And now, weirdly, so on the internet, there are videos of children in piano exams playing on a piece of music, which is quite something. Yeah.
Would you like to queue
Yeah,
up that?
well, I'll queue it up, assuming
See
that
if we
we've got
can
an
get it
internet.
working again.
Yeah,
It's,
I mean, who knows?
A
Let's
bit worried
give
about
it,
the connection.
let's
Oh
give
no,
it-
we're back in business.
let's give it a go. It says these content are simple. Let's see. So this is the trailer, which includes that piece of music.
I've got something in the studio, a drawing of Mickey Mouse. That was when I started to draw. My whole life has been mixed up with art, with painting.
What I experience, what I'm doing, is something which is for me. It's my argument for myself.
Trees that were about to be ripped out of the land, and he was finding that quite upsetting, so he wanted to record it.
Look at the Morrison sky. God's imitating Jimmy Morrison. James Morrison's grasp of a world of sky, earth, light, shade, sea and tree are part of my inner landscape.
My paintings, right up until 6 months ago, were painted outside. I went not knowing anything at all about what I was in for. Landing was terrible. I went onto the little top step. I was almost in tears. It was so beautiful.
Now in northwest Greenland, almost 79 degrees latitude. If your fate is not freezing today, Jim.
The Arctic is melting, and the landscape Jim has painted here probably does not exist in this form right now.
You saw the beer. The site is quite badly deteriorated. I can't paint outside now, and it's a terrible loss to me. Very thought coming in here and not being able to pick up a brush really terrifies me. I'm now being registered as partially sighted. It may seem to be a very minor thing, what I'm proposing and doing, but it's not so minor for me.
Can I interrupt? That really takes you back to writing my novel. That's one of the soundtracks I use.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's really, really strange seeing it with images that have nothing to do with the images I
Really? That's interesting. That's interesting. Well, so the soundtrack that I wrote for that film ended up also becoming being used, or some of the music from it, again, as library music. So it had several different lives. So the music can then end up in other things. So although it was written for this film, sometimes the way the arrangements work, it's ended up in other places as well. So it's interesting that you had different imagery associated with it. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yes, whereas I was coming into it from having found one of the kids playing it on the
did you?
piano.
Right, okay, yeah.
I found that on YouTube, and I thought it's lovely that something that sounds so complex in that context
Yes.
can be something relatively simple.
Well, simple.
When it's
very often
boiled
is-
down to the-
so very often
yeah.
simple is the most effective. Very often. I mean, this is the thing about the weirdness of my job, though. So that could not be further from some of the other stuff I've done. So I thought when you were going to say about the stuff you had to check whether it was, I'm also very well known in a certain area of the world, not anything I know anything about at all, but in wrestling. So in WWF in America, WWE used to be one of the other. I can't remember. I wrote a piece of music again as a library track that got used as the entrance music for apparently a very famous wrestler, Alex Wright. And it's kind of like it's a dance track, like a 90s trance track, really, trance dance. I mean, he's on stage, wears scoopy shorts and does all this stuff, and everybody, they love him. And I wrote this music, I didn't know, it was run for years, and I didn't know. And now it's cropped up, lots of people have written to me because they found out. And they're now using it in a video game, a wrestling video game. And all this stuff, you know, who would have known?
Do you get little residual payments, or do you just get a one-off payment for being in the library?
No, basically you nearly always only get residual payments. So library music is paid on a royalty basis. So when your music gets used, that's when you get paid. Well, that's when you should get paid. It doesn't always work. Another example, actually, I wrote another piece of music, which is a bit of drum and bass music, actually, and it's been the theme for the Oblivion ride at Alton Towers for about 30 years. And I found out about it about 4 years ago. So it's been running all that time, I didn't know. And I also discovered they hadn't been paying for it. So I am now, you cannot claim back money that you haven't been paid after 3 years. But now they put that bit right. But there's 27 years worth of usage, which we didn't know about and haven't been paid for. But that's unfortunately the sort of story of what happens in this industry. It's not all watertight, so you rely a lot on your publishers knowing what's going on, and PRS, the Performing Rights Society, that collect the royalties. If they're not notified of it, they can't really collect it. So yeah, it's a bit of a roller coaster. I just thought of that.
Yeah. Right. You got a question over there?
I'm curious. So you watch the video and then you play along when you're composing, or is it?
Depends. So if I'm doing library music, there obviously isn't any video. I'm given a concept or a brief of some kind, and they'll say, if it's library music, they'll say, we're doing an album of music for quirky drama, just randomly. So they say quirky drama, and that'll be the title of the album, quirky drama, and we need 5 pieces of music, and then maybe give 5 to another composer and 5 to something out in the world. Or they might say we're doing an album of music for the World Cup. They'll give you either a very broad thing, or they'll give you a very specific thing. I'm just trying to think of the recent ones that we've had been given as briefs. But that's the kind of thing. And then you just have to shut your eyes and think of something, you're not looking at anything. But then if I'm doing nothing like a film, then nearly always you're looking at pictures at the same time you're writing to the picture. Certainly things like Doctor Who, you're very specifically writing to picture. Doctor Who in particular was very, the visuals were very related to every note of the music. Very often if somebody picks up a gun, they used to want the music to go, and if you hit someone, the music had to, so I had to try and sync up lots of stuff. They don't do that's not quite such a fashion these days, but it was the fashion of music in those days. Similarly though, with things like Eye of the Storm, I have a relationship with the director that we've worked on films over quite a number of years. He's a director who made his name by directing films about the disaster that is Donald Trump. He did a film called You've Been Trumped, which was about the golf course he built in Aberdeenshire. And honestly, the way he treated the residents was horrific. So Anthony directed, wrote this film, and did some music in that film originally. And then he subsequently done You've Been Trumped 2, which he did as a film about Trump trying to get elected the first time. And sadly get infected the first time. Oh, actually no, sorry, this was the second time. I get confused about the years. But anyway, then he then subsequently made a film called A Dangerous Game, all of which ended up being a trio of films about Trump and his various activities, very often related to golf, but just how badly he treats people. But the way I work with Anthony is he likes to work almost as with a music library, so using me as a library. So he would say, just come up with a load of music and he will fit it in to the film where he thinks is appropriate. And that's quite a nice way of working as well. So he will give me maybe an early classical film, and then I will just come up with music that I think is going to be right for various sequences in the film and edit it in various places. That's a nice way of working. They're a bit quite a free way of working. Then normally at the end of the process, there'll be some sequences that he wants music, specifically written for, and then I will then write to picture directly. So it really depends on the project. It can be all those things, a combination of.
Composers, are there particular composers that you like and certain composers that you hate? Or?
Well, I couldn't possibly say of any I hate, but I grew up loving John Barry.
Yeah.
So I think he was like an early influence for me. John Barry is a film composer. I mean, all the Bond things are just fantastic. And I used to love big fan of TV films as well. I think what I think of as the golden age of TV things, things like The Persuaders. And I used to love the 60s TV themes, things like The Avengers and Department S and those kind of things. So they were big influences on me. More recently, I'm a big fan of Max Richter, who I think has done some amazing scores. Most recently, I just watched Spaceman, which he did. And also the TV series, what was it called now, about everybody having died. Sounds fun, isn't it? The Leftovers. People got disappeared, sorry, a portion of the population suddenly disappeared. And Leftovers, his score was so emotionally on it, it's fantastic. So yeah, I think, looking at two different scales of when I was starting and where I am now, they stand out to me as people that I really admire. So, let's think of the next one.
Yeah.
You started with the Doctor Who theme. I know you did more than one Doctor Who theme because you were involved with variations on a theme CD video. Well, only square CD was on the table. And you did my favourite one ever. I love the Terror Mix.
Thank you.
How hard is it to do the same tune and do different variations without thinking, oh, I've done that?
Well, it's a great composition anyway. So not that. I mean, I don't know how long I could keep doing it. So yeah. So the original, the thing that you're talking about, the Terror version, which I just showed up here, it wasn't always on square seat. This is an interesting story because I'll come directly back to what you said. But just to talk about that one for a minute, that was in 1990, I think. And me and the other two composers who worked on the show at the time, Mark Ayres and Keith McCulloch, were just asked by the label to come up with a variation of any kind of a Doctor Who film, which was quite a nice challenge, really, because they said just do whatever you want. And that meant we could do not what we would do if we'd been asked to do it again for TV. This was a completely free brief. So the interesting thing is the three of us all came up in completely different directions. So Keith McCulloch did a Latin jazz version, which ended up forming part of a skit with Bill Bailey. If anybody had seen Dr. Key. And then Mark Ayres did a kind of 80s drum machine and almost electro kind of version, really. And I always wanted to make Doctor Who a little bit more cinematic. So I decided to do this horror film version of Doctor Who. So that's what I ended up doing. But then that was 1990. At that point, it wasn't particularly difficult because I'd only done one version of the theme. I had done the TV version. And then somebody said, do something entirely different with it. and it's a great piece of music. So yeah, quite easy is the long word, but there's a lot of inspiration there to do it. Subsequently, many years later, this is what I brought this out for, I then returned to the Doctor Who theme to do some remixes of my version of the Doctor Who theme. So it wasn't entirely starting from scratch. I took the individual elements of my version of the theme and turned them into something entirely new, which became the Gallifrey remixes. And I did that because I went to a convention in Los Angeles called Gallifrey One, which is full of great actors who've got fantastic stories about their time on Doctor Who. And I thought, well, they all want to hear a composer talking about my hilarious stories about me in my bedroom recording music. So I thought, what can I do that's a bit different? Oh, I'll do a remix of Doctor Who theme, and I can do that on stage. And I had my laptop, and I just played that one remix, and people really liked it. They said, where can we buy it? I said, well, you can't buy it because it's not available. I just did it for today, and they all said, we must make it available to buy it. So I ended up doing an EP of 4 versions of the Doctor Who theme. They're all brought up to date using more contemporary sounds, but all the elements from the original that were still there. And I spent quite a lot of my life in the 90s and the 2000s writing techno and electronic dance music, because that was a thing I was really into at the time, still am actually, but that was a big part of my life, being about dance music scene. So I took those elements and incorporated them into my love of Doctor Who, the Doctor Who theme, and I always imagined them as being, this is what the music would be if the Doctor went to a club on Gallifrey. This is what they would play. That was the way I approached it. And so yeah, so I ended up doing that. And then it was so popular, and people said, well, is there going to be any more? And I thought, well, I can't do any more variations on the Doctor Who theme. I've done 4 now, and 5 of them with that, and then the original. So that's 6 versions of Doctor Who. You can't do that anymore. But all the incidental music, I thought there were some interesting elements here that might make new tracks. So I then came up with the idea of doing the Ravelox remixes, which was a little bit of music from each of the stories, or 4 of the stories that I had done, including a new version of the Terror version. So I did actually update the Terror version, 7 versions. And then it's just gone on from there. So I've ended up doing music from each of the stories that I worked on, and updating them with this new, modern, contemporary take on the sound. So yeah, it's been great fun to revisit it, and it's nice that people recognise the themes. So not many shows you can do incidental music, and people have got such a love for the show that they recognise the music. And when you hear an updated version of it, they say, oh, I love that because it reminds me of blah, blah, blah. And they can see what was going on on screen at the time. And it's fresh music. It's the sort of music you can quite happily listen to while you're driving or while you're jogging or doing a video. It's not just incidental music.
Are those by any chance going to be available in the
Well,
dealer's
funny
room?
you should say that.
Excellent. I saw some other hands up a minute ago.
You were saying, I thought you were saying that you were mostly self-taught?
Yes.
So when you're making this music for the library,
Yeah.
do you write it out in on all the staves and everything, or is it a piece of music you produce purely electronically without a
Yes.
score?
So depends. If it's just me, there's never any need for a score because I record it all. I come up with it, I play it, I record it all on my computer, I layer everything up, and it just becomes a finished piece. If I'm working with other musicians, which is sometimes the case with the library music, there may be we may have an orchestra, or that we maybe have some soloists or whatever. I will do one of a couple of things. Either I will use the functionality of the computer, which will actually, if I play a simple line on the piano, the computer will give me score notation. And I can use that, if it's a soloist, for example, I can use that and I'm quite content with it being accurate enough for the player to use the notation that's on screen. If it's a more complicated piece and it's orchestral, there's no way I'm going to waste the money that is involved in an orchestra with it not being absolutely perfectly notated correctly. And in those situations, I will work with a score notator whose job it is to take a computer score, go through it, fine-tooth comb, make sure everything is note perfect. Because the computer is note perfect, but it's just stupid. Computers are stupid. They don't actually know the correct way of doing it. You know, technically, yes, that is C#, but it won't know whether it's a C# that the violins can actually play, for example. So there has to be somebody who look at it and relate it to a human being. So in those situations, yeah, you work with a score preparer, somebody who will prepare the score. And also, I don't conduct. I wouldn't be content. I'd be scared to get in front of an orchestra again because somebody's paying for the orchestra. They're very expensive. And you've got like 3 hours or something, and you've got to get all the music done in that time. So I work with professionals in those situations whose job it is to do that particular job. Just as you work with professional players, you know, if you've got a string orchestra and you don't want part of the string players, you want the best string players. So it's a combination. But very often, a lot of what I do doesn't require any of that because it's electronic or it's dance music or it's, you know, it's totally piano and it's just me or whatever. So yeah, it just depends on the project.
And when it goes into the library, it's a complete piece of music.
Yes.
Not a score with a piece of music which they can...
It's a complete piece of music with the versions. So what you have to do is you have to provide a finished piece, say a 2.5, 3 minute piece of music. Then they also want underscores of that piece of music. So there'll be something, the same piece of music with the melody missing, for example, or no drums, or no strings, whatever, different versions. So that again, editors have got a choice of which version, or they might want to blend one with another. And you know, one sequence might want a more full version of the theme, and others might just want that version. So I have to do versions, which are not that complicated because everything's on its own track on the multi-track, so you can just fade something right down to 0. So it's relatively easy to do different versions. But you also have to do is do a 30-second version of each piece and a 60-second version of each piece, and sometimes a 10-second version of each piece, and sometimes a sting, which is just like 2 or 3 seconds. So they, depending on the publisher, you can say they've got their requirements vary about what they need you to deliver. They call them deliverables. I'll take that word. Oh, can you send us the deliverables? So it's quite tricky to get like a 30-second version of a piece that is 3 minutes long to try and make it sound like, you know, to do all the things that the 3-minute version does, but in a 30-second version. And it's because adverts are 30 seconds. So they want a piece that's, you know, and sometimes 15 seconds as well. You have to get to the point quite quickly. But also sometimes, weirdly, you don't need to do the whole piece because the bit that's like, you can tell for an advert, for example, you can sort of just instinctively, you've been doing it for a long time, I can instinctively tell which part of a piece of music is likely to get used for an advert. So very often it might be the intro, because it's got maybe a very distinctive orchestration or something, very distinctive elements in it. And then sometimes, I always think it's a good example is the Archers theme, for example. Everybody knows the main bit of the Archers theme. Then after about 20 seconds, it veers off into another bit, which you never hear because they fade it down at that point. And then, you know, I'm always fascinated by pieces of music everybody knows, but they don't know the second bit. You know, so part of it is that I've written pieces of music that are 3 minutes long, and people only know the first.
Oh, it's like when Babylon Zoo's Spaceman was used for an advert, and they just used the beginning bit, and everybody went, "Wow, this is a really good bit of music. I must buy it." And then we're terribly disappointed to find that just after that bit, it changes completely, and they didn't like it.
What's the most unexpected use of a piece of music of yours that you've heard and thought, I never intended it for that, but it works?
That's a really good question. I don't know if it is. I had a piece of music in an advert for Vanish Carpet Clean. Oh, you are laughing. It was actually probably my biggest earner in my entire career. And it was a piece of music which I thought was awful. But it's not surprising, because the brief I'd been given was middle of the road.
Wow.
And that's really hard. In those days, I would just do whatever anybody asked me to do. Middle of the road, okay. So I did this piece of music, and I had some really good musicians on it. It was a really good bass player, and a really good guitarist, and you know, proper musos. So actually, I'm making out it was terrible. They made it good, but it was quite bland. And it ended up being used in this advert, which was on everywhere, every commercial break, all over the place, all over Europe, all over the place. And I was bored with it. The only thing that perked me up is I kept reminding myself every time it was on, there was some money coming in. I kept saying, oh, it's on again. It's on again. And it was so, I don't know if it was unexpected, but it was kind of unexpected how well that did. You know, those are very rare. You do a thing that is one piece of music that just earns you loads of money. One other thing that did earn me lots of money, this is a long time ago as well. I wrote music for a children's series called Space Vets. This was in the 90s, and it was a space set thing for young kids with puppets, you know, on a space station. And one of the things they wanted was, I went to a meeting with the director and the producer, and they were talking, which wasn't particularly relevant to me, about the sound effects they wanted, which was, they wanted the background hum of the engines of a spaceship. And knowing Dick Mills, who worked at BBC Radio Phonic Workshop, I knew how he did this sort of stuff. I said, oh, I can do that. I'll do that. Don't worry, that's easy. I just knew that I could do it on my synth. Get this background humming sort of noise, and that would be. Little did I realise they were going to run this through every episode, almost from start to finish. And because I had done it, and it was on the music budget, it was considered to be music. And so I basically got 15 minutes worth of music out of every episode of this thing. Even though I wasn't producing it. It was just me. I went home with the synth and I fiddled with a few knobs and went. That's probably enough. And then that got a lot of money. Hasn't happened for many years. Yes.
How much accreditation do you get for your library music, or don't you get it?
Well, that's another good question. In television, almost none. So for some reason, well, I say for some reason, the reason for it is that there is not time to credit everybody involved in a TV show. So the TV credits are quite minimal, and so you don't tend to get credited. The only credit I get is when I look at my royalty statement and I can see my music is used in episode 14 of Homeland, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's great. Okay, I know. Nobody else knows. If it's a film, you do get credit because I don't know, obviously the deals that publishers make, obviously there are a lot great long 20-minute credit sequences at the end of a lot of films, and there's room to put all these people in. Driver and the catering assistant, all get credited on a movie. So yeah, very little. So it's quite I was going to say thankless stars. It's not thankless stars. It's just you just have to accept you're not doing it for the glory when you do library music.
But it's a good blessing that music you didn't like. So
well, yes,
no one knows.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
I've done quite a lot of re-editing of Doctor Who's.
Oh yeah.
And trying to shorten them down, the classics.
Yes.
And the hardest thing by any means with it is the incidental background music. It's the bane of my life sometimes. Because of course you can edit the image,
yes,
but the music will jar,
yes,
and you've got to like fade it out there. Yeah. Did you ever come across that with sort of late post-editing? Or would you always have a fully finished edit to work to?
I was lucky. I don't think I ever came across that. By the time I got the VHS, which is what I was working from, they were fine cuts. They were locked. There was never any adjustment to it. So anything that you're talking about will always come later on if new versions have come out, or they had to be re-edited for some reason, and by that point I'd gone. So no, I never had to get involved in that, and I was just lucky that I never had to change anything, which, you know, can be difficult as well. It is a problem when you're doing a film, because invariably they'll say, this is the picture on, we've got it, this is it, no more changes. Then about a week later they say, well, we made it just a couple of changes, but it'll only be a couple of seconds. So a couple of seconds means that everything goes out of sync then. So you have to kind of make a note last longer or something in order to shift everything on. So yeah, no, it hasn't been an issue for me, but I do apologise on behalf of my fellow composers. Yeah.
Is there a modern film or TV series that you haven't been involved with, but you think, oh, I could do something with that?
Most shows, I mean, for obvious thing, I'd love to do Doctor Who again. I think I'd do it differently to the way it's done now, but I'd love to be involved in doing something like that. What else? I mean, I'd like to do a good mystery drama, to be honest. That, you know, almost anything I can think of that is in that genre of something I've not really done, and yet I feel as though I'm sort of itching to do something like that. But no particular show. I'd love to get my hands on something like that. I'd love to get my hands on Star Trek or something.
For your own entertainment, have you watched the programme and written what you think the music should be?
What, actually written it, or in my head?
Like, in your head.
In my head all the time. So I'm constantly watching programmes, and like I said earlier, constantly watching programmes and thinking, oh, music's really spoiling this. You know, it's the bane of the composer's life, I think, to can't switch off from the music in a production. So very often I watch things and think, I quite like that, but I can't watch it because of the music, which is an awful thing to say, really. I just think sometimes it just intrudes. I mean, this is the one thing I'll just mention one example of that, and it's a bit unfair, but because the guy has actually done lots of fantastic music. The guy who wrote the music to Hour, which was really, really good music, Daniel Pennington, great composer. But he did the music for the revival of Upstairs, Downstairs, and I couldn't watch it because I just thought the music was so wrong. It was, for me, it was spoiling the show. Because it was very intrusive, there were a lot of woodwinds that were quite high, and that was kind of, in the music, the audio spectrum was clashing with dialogue, I thought. But you know, I'm not trying to criticise him as a composer because he's done, like I say, some amazing stuff, just that particular one. But there's lots of other programs, particularly British. I don't know why British TV in particular seems to suffer from this. Overuse of music, and I think sometimes it's down to directors not having confidence in what they're producing, because you've got someone who's got amazing actors who are acting their hearts out and they're not letting them do it. You know, the actors are doing it, you don't need the music to do it. And sometimes it's the house style. I've known about Doctor Who a bit over the last 10 or 15 years. The house style of Doctor Who now is to overdo it in the music. Sometimes it's too loud, it's too flashy, there's too much of it, and I think actually it's a shame. We've got some great actors who are doing some great work on screen. Don't fight it. Don't tell them.
On the phone now?
I'd answer that question. Do you think music has changed where people expect that layeredness nowadays? Do you think that's the way things changed since when you started in the industry?
Yeah, I think you're probably absolutely right. I think people expect music to. I don't know whether the general public do.
No.
I honestly don't know. Because the weird thing is, I'm saying I don't think it's I think it's very much a British thing, and to some extent an American. Well, I've watched a lot of dramas from other parts of the world where they don't seem to do that. I've watched recently a lot of Australian, New Zealand shows and everything. Music's very subtle. It can still be fantastically memorable, but it doesn't clash. Whereas I think a lot of British shows, it's just, as I say,
Less is more. Less
Yeah.
is more.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, thank you very much, Dominic.
Very welcome.
And now we'll have to listen out for more of yours, see if we can
You
spot
won't
it.
know it's me, of course. But, yeah, and do not be in the dealer's room, as you say. Not all the time, but probably in about 10, 15 minutes.
Thank you very much.